All right, guys, hello and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. This week, we're going to be tackling part 3 of our United States Hegemony and its Perils series. Last week, we had a long discourse talking more particularly about United States economic hegemony, the ways in which it's gamified the global economy using institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, using its dollar hegemony, the exorbitant privilege of dollar hegemony in order to, manipulate markets and subjugate the third world into a more neo-colonial state that can be exploited. We also talked, as I said, about the U.S. military hegemony. We had a long discourse on a lot of the atrocities the American empire has committed over the years. We talked about ways in which the U.S. uses this military hegemony, the massive blueprint of its military around the world to not only coerce foreign countries that are nominally considered adversaries, but also coerce its, quote unquote, allies into marching lockstep with American interests, American imperial interests abroad. So we had a large conversation about that using the memorandum from the Chinese Foreign Ministry that outlined the 5 pillars of United States hegemony. Using that document, we've been going through this series to discuss the 5 pillars that are, economic hegemony, military hegemony, political hegemony, and now today we'll be getting into a discussion surrounding the ways the United States maintains and abuses technological and cultural hegemony. So as we get into this, guys, we're going to backtrack a little bit from last week's episode. We started to kind of bleed into technological hegemony, but we're going to go back a little bit and discuss the Plaza Accords that occurred in the 80s going into the 90s between, high-tech corporations competing from Japan and the United States over like semi-conductors and microchips and things like that. So we're going to go back. We're going to read a little bit from the memorandum here, and then we're going to analyze an article that I have here that gives us a little bit more information on that topic because it's such a great example of the ways that the United States abuses its technological hegemony, uses copyright and patent laws to, ensure that no one else has access to these commodities, to these technologies, and also the ways that they use their political and military hegemony to kind of coerce and make sure that American corporations end up on top when it comes to the technological superstructure, right? So let's jump right into here, guys. We have the memorandum here again. You guys are familiar with this. This is what we've been covering over the last couple of weeks. And we just finished this section here, economic hegemony, but I wanted to come back and touch on, let's see if I can find this specific spot here with the Plaza Accords. Right here, yep. The United States says here, the United States willfully suppresses its opponents with economic coercion. And as we're going to see, that also applies to allies, right? It says here, the United States leveraged its hegemonic financial power against Japan and concluded the Plaza Accord. As a result, yen was pushed up and Japan was pressed to open its financial market and reform its financial system. The Plaza Accord dealt a heavy blow to the growth momentum of the Japanese economy, leaving Japan to what was later called the lost 3 decades. Now, this is important because the Plaza Accords go along with what we're going to be discussing here more specifically in this article, the Fairchild deal. And the Fairchild deal happened right around the same time as this. You got to keep in mind this late post-war period, after the Marshall Plan had helped to rebuild Japan and South Korea, by the mid-70s going through the mid-80s, into the late 80s, Japan had really arisen as this huge technological powerhouse. I mean, they took those Marshall Plan dollars and they took the reinvestment to help them rebuild their country, and they just spearheaded a massive technological series of innovations. I mean, things like CD-ROMs, computers, microchips, television sets, sound systems. I mean, anything and everything you can think of. I think some of you watching this show are probably old enough to remember a period when, the big scare wasn't everything being made in China. It was everything being made in Japan. And, that's where we got companies like Sony, creating gaming systems, creating some of the best sound systems that you could acquire, television sets, things like that. And then also companies like Mitsubishi and stuff that had previously been part of the Japanese Imperial War Machines military industrial complex. They applied a lot of these microchips and computer innovations towards, more military hardware and stuff like that. So this is what we're going to be talking about here. But before we jump into that, let's kind of grease the wheels a little bit more here with a discussion on technological hegemony. That is Pillar 4 of the United States hegemony and its Perils memorandum. Says here, technological hegemony, monopoly, and suppression. The United States seeks to deter other countries' scientific, technological, and economic development by wielding monopoly power, suppression measures, and technology restrictions in high-tech fields. The United States monopolizes intellectual property in the name of protection. The United States reaps excessive profits through monopoly. And here we're going to get into this U.S.-Japan semi-conductor agreement that I was talking about. In the 1980s, to contain the development of Japan's semiconductor industry, the United States launched the 301 investigation, built bargaining power in bilateral negotiations through multilateral agreements, threatened to label Japan as conducting unfair trade. In this case, that was what they called chip dumping. They were dumping microchips at an extremely low price, and imposed retaliatory tariffs, forcing Japan to sign the U.S.-Japan Semiconductor Agreement. As a result, Japanese semiconductor enterprises were almost completely driven out of global competition, and their market share dropped from 50% to 10%. Meanwhile, with the support of the U.S. government, a large number of U.S. semiconductor enterprises took the opportunity and grabbed larger market share. Okay, so, this is interesting because this is also something that we're seeing today when it comes to like 5G tech, when it comes to, again, we're having a new microchip war, this time with China. Obviously, this is one of the reasons why there's so much tension surrounding the island of Taiwan, is because one of the biggest either semiconductor or microchip, perhaps both, manufacturers in the world is located in Taiwan, and both the United States and China are heavily reliant on that source of high-tech manufacturing, right? So, this that we're talking about with the Plaza Accord, the Fairchild deal that we're going to discuss with this article is very relevant to today. We saw, Huawei being shut down in the U.S. We've seen the U.S. also push that ban onto European countries and countries in Africa as well. And the whole premise around that during the Donald Trump administration in particular, but going on to until today under the Biden administration, was that somehow Huawei was stealing data of American citizens and then passing it on to the CPC, which is just a complete fucking farce. Every tech company on the planet essentially steals your data. Every single one, from American to Japanese to Chinese to European, they all do it because that's one of their main, ways that they commodify their business is by selling data to third parties, using data to, fine-tune advertisements to certain demographics and things like that. I mean, you guys know all of this. So this whole topic around America's technological hegemony and the ways that they keep it in place, going back in time here to the 80s to discuss the Fairchild deal, is incredibly relevant as we see it happening again here today. So we'll go ahead and just jump right into the reading here. This is kind of neat here, guys. This article I have for you, let me do a little check here. Pretty cool. Let me scroll up quick to show you. So this is from the Los Angeles Times. This article is actually from November 30th of 1987. And I just thought that was really cool for two reasons. One, it's a great source because, we're getting to see the discussion around this as it's going on or shortly after it's gone on. And the dust is kind of beginning to settle on this microchip war, on this tech war between Japan and the U.S. But just a little, kind of anecdotal Easter egg type of reason why this is cool too is, This could have very well been one of the first articles ever posted onto the internet, because this is also around the time that the internet was beginning to take shape. Obviously not in the form that we know of it today, but very proto cyberpunk period, the late 80s here. So this is very well one of the first, perhaps news articles that was on the internet at the time, back when the internet was, not in everybody's home. It wasn't until the mid to late 90s and even into the early 2000s that, having the internet and a personalized computer in your home was pretty normal. So anyway, this is an article from Los Angeles Times. It says the Fairchild deal, trade war, when chips were down. And we'll scroll down here. This is, you can kind of see the URL here. If you just Google the name of this, because I'll probably forget to put it in the comments section. I always do. But I would if you want to know more about this time period and this way this kind of chip war went down, this tech war, this monopoly war, just Google this Los Angeles Times Fairchild deal. It should come up. I'd recommend reading this whole article because it's really in depth, and I would love to just sit here and read all of it to you. But I just highlighted a few things that kind of show the ways in which the Japanese tech sector was dominating and was poised to really take over the whole world. And how that was affecting American corporations, and how not just American corporate interests stepped in, but intelligence community and the Department of Defense as well. So we'll get into some of the reading here, guys. It says, lulled by long market dominance and technological leadership, U.S. companies were neglecting quality problems and inefficiencies in manufacturing. The Japanese companies, some of the same conglomerates that already had taken over home appliance and consumer electronics markets, used U.S. technology and their own superior production methods to make better and cheaper memory chips. The conglomerates offered built-in customers for Japanese chip makers, while trade and cultural barriers kept U.S. firms out of Japan's lucrative chip markets. Okay, so at least one thing here, maybe two. I want to highlight this line right here. It says, used U.S. technology and their own superior production methods to make better and cheaper memory chips. This key part right here, used U.S. technology. Does that sound familiar at all to you guys? It should, because this is the same kind of rhetoric that is used in the mainstream media and through American politicians today to kind of play sleight of hand about China's rise not only as a economic power, but as a technological power in the world. They say that the reason why China is really advancing in 5G, is really advancing in microchips and AI and things like that, is because they stole U.S. technology. They stole U.S. patents, and they paint it like it's this whole huge big conspiracy with like Chinese Communist Party spooks coming over here and being like no 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 and breaking into Apple and stealing a phone and then like smuggling it. It's none of that. As you guys probably know, the reason why China has been able to become such a technological powerhouse is due to a trade-off that they had with American corporations. China during the opening up period said, hey, we will let capitalist interests into our country to, use our, vast resources and new infrastructure and large labor force, large, cheap labor force. No problem. We'll let you come in and do that. But in exchange, instead of you just coming in and using us as a workshop, we need to have access not just to technology, but to the sciences and the means of understanding that technology. That was a trade-off. It was a completely consensual trade-off that American capitalist corporations made in order to exploit the cheap labor in China. And now, decades later, after the 70s, when the opening up began and this sort of accord was struck and hammered into stone, we're beginning to see the consequences of it, where these American corporations, in their hubris and their immediate greed, their avarice for the bottom line every quarter, have really kind of let China eat their lunch. So this should really ring true to you or familiar to you. Used U.S. technology and their own superior production methods to make better and cheaper memory chips. Of course, they paint it a little less sinisterly, because even at that time, despite the competition, China was an ally. let's see here. But then it also says, while trade and cultural barriers kept U.S. firms out of Japan's lucrative markets, right? And they paint it as if Japan wouldn't allow American investment in. And yeah, that may be true. That's because culturally, even Japanese capitalists, and maybe it's different now, but at least in this time period, with that generation that had lived through the war or one generation removed from the war, there's a strong sense of nationalism in Japan and pride, and you could even reference the Bushido Code a little bit there, and maybe that's a bit cringe, but it is the case where the politicians there, the corporations there had some sense of fealty to their people, to keeping their people employed, to, building up the power and grandiosity of Japan in the post-war period. The U.S. corporations, U.S. politicians by this period in the 80s especially, don't care about that. They are willing to, this is when we begin to see the process of outsourcing jobs, begin capital flight, deindustrialization. They don't have that sense of fealty or loyalty or sense of patriotism for the United States, the country of the United States. They don't care. They want that bottom line, and they want it now, as we talked about, right? So these are two things that you should really take from that paragraph here that should strike a chord with the modern times. So some more reading here about this chip war, guys. As a pricing war escalated, U.S. chip makers cut into their profits to compete, but the Japanese reached into the deep pockets of their conglomerate parents and lowered prices even more. To the American companies, this was quote-unquote dumping, selling chips below the cost to make them. Noyce, whose intel saw the price of a $17 chip fall to $4.50 in just 8 months, warned that the Japanese intent was, quote-unquote, quite clear. They are out to slit our throats. So with this right here, I just want to point this out. I'm sure this was a strategy by Japanese corporations to undercut the market, but they look at it as dumping. But I would perhaps counter that, as it said in this first line up here, lulled by long market dominance and technological leadership, rather than this necessarily being some massive chip dumping strategy, I would go ahead and suppose that the monopoly power that U.S. corporations had, particularly over their own domestic market for this type of technology, but then also on the global stage, I'm going to go ahead and guess it was what American corporations are always infamous or famous for, is monopoly scalping, price gouging, because they had the access and the patents to this technology. The intellectual property was under their control. The means of production, the means to produce this sort of high technology is completely under their control. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that the $17 a chip was really an instance of price gouging, and as Japanese corporations came in and competed on the global stage and in turn in the U.S. domestic market, I'm going to go ahead and say that they were still making money. It's not like they were doing this at a loss. I just think they used, as it said, also superior production methods, more efficient production methods, coupled with a, willingness to not engage in such high profit margins and price gouging, allowed them to undercut the market. And this was really huge at this time going into the mid to late 80s, because this competition coming out of Japan in particular is what brought the price of not just microchips, but a bunch of technology, computer technology in particular, down to such a low price that as we began to see in the early to mid 90s, the home computer revolution and subsequent widening and growing of the internet happened, that it really changed the course of human history, kind of sent us down this real cyberpunk path for good or ill that we're on now, where the internet is anywhere and everywhere, literally everywhere. We're damn near close to putting it right into our brains if psychos like Elon Musk get his way. But yeah, a couple of things there for you guys to take from going on here. It says American companies were staggered in the crucial market for memory chips called DRAMs, for example. Japanese companies went from 5% share to control 90% in only 4 years. By the mid-1980s, American companies had virtually abandoned the commodity chip market, many moving to more sophisticated devices with higher prices but smaller markets. Fairchild, which is the company they're referencing here, was among them. Okay, then the boom turned to bust. Orders from computer makers slowed to a standstill, but the plants kept churning them out. Suddenly, the market was flooded with cheap chips. And again, like I was saying, this really did kind of lead to the computer revolution that we all take for granted now, right? In 1985, the U.S. semiconductor industry lost more than 40,000 jobs, and its 5 largest manufacturers recorded $343 million in losses, only a year after profits of $1.3 billion. So a huge sideswipe at the U.S. chip and tech market in general, right? By the end of that year, U.S. companies were clinging to a narrow 49% to 42% lead in markets for all types of chips. As competitive hostilities were heating up, National Semi-Spork said, "We're at war with Japan, not with guns and ammunition, but an economic war with technology, productivity, and quality." So, this is the United States, leaders in the U.S., at this time saying we're at war with somebody who is ostensibly an ally. And of course, we're seeing this. We see America's willingness to go to war and to subjugate its quote unquote allies. Really, they're not allies, they're client states, they're vassal states of the American empire. Case in point, the United States empire blowing up Nord Stream pipeline in Germany. I mean, that's your most recent incident with this, but going all the way back to the 80s here, and even long before that, with like the U.S. purposefully tanking the commodities market in order to, subjugate a lot of the third world that was using high prices of commodities to develop infrastructure and means of production in their own countries. That affected even U.S. allies, right? It wasn't just, countries that were ostensibly at odds with the U.S. So this is nothing new in American politics. Going on here, guys, says, there were renewed calls for U.S. government intervention from some of the most independent-minded business executives on the globe. Many like AMD's Sanders. I mean, that's just crazy. AMD's been around a long time, guys. Said they wanted Washington to declare that the U.S. semiconductor industry was sacred and we will not permit it to be destroyed. In an unprecedented move, Baldrige filed an anti-dumping claim against the Japanese and the U.S. Trade Representative Clayton Uter in 1986. He pushed through a hellishly difficult trade agreement in which the Japanese promised to end dumping and open their markets to the United States. So so what this is through the course of the Plaza Accords, like we talked about in this Fairchild Agreement, the U.S. used, its dollar hegemony and its complete control of the world financial markets, coupled with multilateral agreements, that being its political hegemony, to break the back of the Japanese tech industry, completely break the back, and not just break the back of competitors in high tech, but to open up Japanese domestic markets, which had previously had their own protectionist measures, open to U.S. conglomerates, U.S. corporations. But of course, protectionism for U.S. corporations remains. And this is something we see today. Like one of the reasons why Apple is still such a large corporation, has such a large global market share, despite the fact that it really doesn't innovate anymore. People don't understand, but Apple isn't a tech company. It's an intellectual property rights company. A lot of the development and, of course, as you guys know, the manufacturing of Apple phones, Apple products, is all done through third-party corporations. Third-party corporations do the R&D, they do the testing, they do the manufacturing, they do the shipping. All Apple is, it's nothing special. All Apple is they are a brand that owns intellectual property rights, right? So all these other corporations that actually do something productive, i.e. Research and develop the phones or products, ship the products, manufacture the products, all these things, they're paying rent, despite the fact that they do all the productive work, to the Apple logo, so to speak, right? And this is what we saw with this come about as a result of the Fairchild Accord deal and the Plaza Accords, right? I have a little bit more here for you guys that I'll read. It says Brooks' hostile reception was building before he got to Washington. The very day newspapers reported to the Fujitsu offer, Charles Ferguson of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Center for Technology, began, blah, 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 sorry guys, picked up the phone and began ringing alarm bells throughout the Capitol. He called the Defense Department, the White House, contacts in the intelligence community, and Smith like a Paul Revere warning that the Japanese are coming. Ferguson said Fairchild was too important to be lost to Japan. So this was them stopping the purchase of an American tech company by a Japanese tech company. You know, now these mergers have become so, as long as you're in the global Western order, these mergers don't really matter anymore, right? There's one thing I just wanted to highlight down here. Sorry, it's all the way down here. CIA officials present. And it just talks about how the CIA was there, the Department of Defense, all these people. And the reason you might be asking, why is the CIA there? Well, one, and why is the Department of Defense there? One, the CIA and the Department of Defense there, because that's their job, is to uphold the hegemony and absolute control over the world by American corporations. That's what the CIA is. The CIA is the paramilitary wing of the ruling class that exists outside of the spectrum of acceptable political thought and action within liberal democracy, right? So that's what they're there for, and the American military obviously plays that role as well, but you have to do a lot more manufacturing of consent and political engineering to mobilize the whole military. The CIA exists without all those parameters because they're fucking spooks, right? The other reason, though, that we should highlight that the CIA, Department of Defense, Department of War, more like it, would be involved with this is because the same reason why they're so involved today with the chip war with China is modern day war, modern day military technology is so reliant on these microchips. So when we're hearing about this microchip war then and now with China, we need to keep in mind it's not just like having control over the TV market or the stuff that goes in your car or the computer market or the phone market. That's inconsequential in a sense to them on the grander geopolitical scale, right? It's really about every missile, every tank, every plane, every fucking satellite, all of it. Everything that, other than your good old-fashioned American rifle, right? All of it, all the rest of it, even the production of the rifles and ammunition, I guess, is completely reliant on microchips, right? It's a real archstone, or high technology in general, not just microchips. It's a real archstone of the supremacy of the American military machine, the hegemony of American military, is that they have this technological hegemony. And this kind of brings up a larger discussion about the way these five pillars, political, economic, military, technological, and cultural, all sort of intermesh with one another. And the American empire cannot continue to exist if even one of those pillars begins to crumble. The American empire, its domination of the world, could be looked at as the roof of the temple, and these five pillars, military, political, economic, are what hold that roof up. And if one of them falls, the roof may still remain, but it makes it a lot easier for it to tumble, right? So that's really all we have with this argument or article here, guys. We will jump back into the memorandum here, though. So keep in mind, again, guys, we're going to be talking about technological hegemony and cultural hegemony. I'm going to be kind of spilling back and forth between the both. They'll be roughly in order, roughly first technological hegemony and then cultural hegemony. But there will be some room for the discussion to kind of intermingle. So just be aware of that if I get ahead of myself or behind myself at any point here. Let's see here. Okay, yep, let's pull this up. So starting where we left off, guys, says the United States politicizes, weaponizes technological issues, and uses them as ideological tools, overstretching the concept of national security. The United States mobilized state power to suppress and sanction the Chinese company Huawei, restricted the entry of Huawei products into the U.S. market, cut off its supply of chips and operating systems, and coerced other countries to ban Huawei from undertaking local 5G network construction. It even talked Canada into unwarrantedly detaining Huawei's CFO, Meng Wanzhou, for nearly 3 years. So a lot of you guys may not know that story. One of the executives of Huawei was detained in the U.S. for several years during kind of the height of the hysteria around Huawei and things like that. But this is very important, guys. Overstretching the concept of national security. The United States mobilized state power to suppress and sanction Chinese company Huawei. That's what the same thing we saw with the Fairchild Agreement is, they paint it like it threatens the sovereignty of the United States for other countries to be competitive in high technology. And this is why they, again, like I said, work so hard to ensure that American corporations remain in damn near absolute control over the intellectual property of some of the most important technology on the planet, right? Let's see here. And has put more than 1,000 Chinese enterprises on sanctions lists. In addition, the United States has also imposed controls of biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and other high-end technologies, reinforced export restrictions, tightened investment screening, suppressed Chinese social media apps such as TikTok and WeChat. Obviously, now we're beginning to see dialogue once again about banning TikTok for the same reason they banned Huawei, that the Chinese government's spying on you and stealing your data. No, it's because social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and things like that don't want any competition domestically for their domination. And also because TikTok doesn't necessarily toe the line with censorship, with what the U.S. military apparatus wants to be. I mean, obviously, guys. I mean, you guys, you see it all the time how censored American social media and video platforms are, like YouTube. Guys, I have 2,400 subscribers. If I don't push out my videos to get some immediate algorithm boost, I'll get under 100 views. Because it's not because my shit sucks. My shit's okay. My shit's good, as good as just about anybody else's. It's because subscribers don't get shown it. It's just an example. Obviously, you don't need me to rant about the woes of being a sad boy YouTuber here. But this is what this always is. Going on here says, and lobbied the Netherlands and Japan to restrict exports of chips-related equipment or technology in China. Going on here, the United States solidifies its technological monopoly in the name of protecting democracy. In May 2019, the United States enlisted 32 countries to the Prague 5G Security Conference in the Czech Republic and issued the Prague Proposal in an attempt to exclude China's 5G products. In April 2020, then U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the 5G Clean Path, a plan designed to build technological alliance in the 5G field with partners bonded by their shared ideology on democracy and the need to protect cybersecurity. The measures, in essence, are the U.S. attempts to maintain its technological hegemony through technological alliances. So, yeah, what that is there, guys, that's the U.S. coming together with all other Western powers and any other potentially sympathetic parties or client states, people that are under the American boot, de facto, de jure, to come together and bar Chinese exports wherever possible. They don't want them in Europe. They don't want them here. We've seen some pushback from the European Union on this because they realize how dependent their economy is. They're already pissed that the U.S. has cut off cheap Russian gas, and the U.S. would love to cut off cheap tech and cheap consumer goods from China, which, is one of the – what are the three pillars of what remains of neoliberal prosperity in this time period is cheap energy from Russia, cheap commodities from China, and cheap raw goods from the global south, all upheld with the fourth pillar of it, which is the U.S. military to keep it all in place, right? So that's what this is. I mean, they put it around democracy, as always with the U.S. empire. It's always democracy. This is why we're doing this terrible ass thing. This is why we're cheating in this way. It's always democracy. But don't make a mistake. Again, going back to what I said, it's never about democracy. It's about protectionism. And the thing that's embarrassing here is for companies or countries, they are pretty much companies, aren't they? For countries like Japan, countries like South Korea, the European Union, I mean, they have to realize that this is not in their interests as well. Like we've seen time and time again that the U.S. will, garish them as much as they'll garish China. But it doesn't matter. It's just this U.S. cultural hegemony as well that we're going to go on to talk about. They just have complete domination over the psyche of the political and ruling class in these other countries, right? It doesn't matter that they've done this to Japan. It doesn't matter that they're doing this to Germany with their, reliance on Russian energy. It doesn't seem to matter what the United States does, because one reason is the United States has completely polluted the democratic processes of those countries. Like they have dumped money into their political parties. They've dumped money into their political class. They've dumped money and done mergers with their media and their media class, media corporations, to where whatever semblance you think there is of democracy in Europe or in these Asian countries, it's just another example of the U.S. spook jobs doing everything they can over a long period of time to completely manipulate and pollute the political processes of other countries. But they've done it to their allies. And as we'll see here, they use some of this technological hegemony as well to spy on those supposed allies, right? Going on here, guys, says the United States has long been notorious as an empire of hackers. Once again, guys, who's ever writing this document, they're metal as fuck, I'll say that. Blamed for its rampant acts of cyber theft around the world, it has all kinds of means to enforce pervasive cyber attacks and surveillance, including using analog base station signals to access mobile phones for data theft, manipulating mobile apps, infiltrating cloud servers, and stealing through undersea cables. The list goes on. An empire of hackers, an empire of spies, an empire of liars. That's what the United States is. And it's not just China that thinks this. Okay. U.S. surveillance is indiscriminate. All can be targets of its surveillance, be they rivals or allies. Even leaders of allied countries such as former German Chancellor Angela Merkel and several French presidents. And this is crazy. Angela Merkel and the presidents of France, like those are the number one lockstep jackboot motherfuckers of the American empire in Europe. Like they are the linchpins in Europe, those countries are, of American domination. Even they get spied on by the U.S. intelligence community using this technological monopoly, this technological hegemony. Insane. Such eavesdropping on allies and partners has already caused worldwide outrage. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, a website that has exposed U.S. surveillance programs, said that do not expect a global surveillance power to act with honor or respect. There is only one rule. There are no rules. And to that, I would add, I can't remember who, I believe it was Henry Kissinger who said this, the foul beast of a man, demon in human flesh, Henry Kissinger. I believe he said, America has no friends, America has no allies, it just has interests. And anybody thinking about cutting a deal with the gangsters of the American empire ought to think about that. But going along with this last kind of quote here about surveillance, talking about WikiLeaks, we're going to get into these next two pieces here that talk about Snowden and talk about the role social media corporations play in censorship and creating using technological hegemony to induce cultural hegemony, and that'll serve as sort of a greasing of the wheels, a preparing of the landing strip for our discussion on cultural hegemony as well. All right, guys. So let's go into this next piece of source material I have here. This is from Politico. So Politico is quite clearly, quite obviously, not a Chinese asset, and it's not Chinese propaganda. Okay, so to kind of fact check and give you a little more context on what we're talking about, with the U.S. being a massive surveillance state and empire of spies and hackers, right? So you have this article here from Politico, kind of fact-checking this a little bit. It says, Snowden's back. Spying scandal clouds EU-U.S. ties ahead of Biden visit. Media reports allege Danish intelligence helped the U.S. spy on top European politicians. There's our boy Snowden. I just have a little bit highlighted here for you guys. It says, 2 weeks before the U.S. president makes his first visit to Europe since being elected, Danish media reported the country's secret services helped American counterparts to eavesdrop on European leaders. The report thrust Europeans back to the dark days of 2013 when whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed massive U.S. surveillance programs that included tapping the mobile phones of allied heads of state, including that of German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And then this article, if you want to read it, goes on to discuss how they were, potentially spying on President Macron, spying on other French officials, spying on leaders all across Europe, especially at a time going into, the pandemic and just absolutely tenuous times, right? And we've been through all this. That's the real egregious part of this, is we've been through all this, and the U.S. talks about how they've dealt with it or they've reformed it, but no, all this infrastructure is still in place. They still use it every bit as much, if not more, than they had used to. The U.S. intelligence community, the surveillance state, the assets and endless amounts of spies and double agents and spooks of all colors, shapes, and sizes, they are not going anywhere. And everybody is on their radar, U.S. friend or not, right? But this next thing I want to show you, I don't necessarily have anything highlighted from it. This is from Monthly Review online. Shout out to you guys. You guys actually posted one of my videos on here a month or two ago. I didn't highlight anything out of this because there is a lot of information here, but this is a really good deep dive into, as the title here says, how social networks became a subsidiary of the FBI and CIA, right? And this just goes through all the ways in which these tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, are in bed either willingly or unwillingly with the U.S. intelligence community, with the FBI, with the CIA. It talks about the whole thing with like Russiagate and with Donald Trump, like how you had people in the Department of Defense and the FBI, CIA, like coming and like coercing people on Twitter. I mean, coercing is maybe a bit of a stretch. I think most of them probably did it pretty willingly to try to sort out some sort of connection between Donald Trump and the Kremlin. And this is a great piece here. If you want to check it out yourselves, just go to MR Online, how social networks became a subsidiary of the FBI and CIA. Obviously, Matt Taibbi covered this pretty in depth. I think he's working on writing a book on it right now. Just a great resource, kind of really outlining all the details, all the different ways that these tech companies are in bed with the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. surveillance state. But more than that, guys, some of you may know this, some of you may not. A lot of these tech companies either got their start from the U.S. intelligence community, from the CIA, funding them through like backdoor organizations or fundraising, or, got massive subsidies from the government, or this or that. Like case in point is Elon Musk. I mean, his SpaceX program, the reason why he became a billionaire is from billions upon billions of dollars in contracts and subsidies from the U.S. government. But beyond that, it got its start. It got its beginning venture capital funding from a CIA cutout known as Q Intel Pro. Okay, Q Intel Pro is a series of front organizations directly linked to the CIA and all their dark money, however they get it, either through, running guns, running drugs, smuggling, blackmail, however, all the dirty ways the CIA gets its money. They funnel that into Q Intel programs, facade organizations, different venture capital organizations, and then they dump that money into tech startups with the explicit purpose of getting R&D off the ground for stuff that's going to help the U.S. military-industrial complex and the U.S. surveillance state complex, right? All of this stuff. These people are completely intertwined. Google got its start through like the CIA and the Pentagon. Again, going back to Elon Musk, that's what the SpaceX program is. That's what Starlink is. It's a series of spy satellites and things like that. I mean, this stuff is just completely crazy. But going on from this, guys, I do want to get into the cultural hegemony here. And I only really have one source that I want to show you guys that's in writing. Other than that, I kind of just want to read from the document itself because it does some really great analysis on its own. I'll read a little bit of this, and then I want to show you guys a couple of videos that sort of address, one, what is cultural hegemony? Like, what does that mean? What is the theory behind it? And some of you may already know this, but I know there's a lot of people who do watch this channel that are kind of, just starting to bud into political discourse and into political theory. So I thought maybe it would be valuable for them. And going along with that, I want to play this short video I have discussing Noam Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent, and that discusses the five filters, of, the media machine, like what our news, what our politics is filtered through to the public to manufacture consent. So that's kind of where we're going to go with this, guys. I'll just open up here with a little bit of reading from the memorandum. It says, the global expansion of American culture is an important part of its external strategy. The United States has often used cultural tools to strengthen and maintain its hegemony in the world. The United States embeds American values in its products, such as movies. American values and lifestyle are a tied product to its movies and TV shows, publications, media content, and programs by the government-funded nonprofit cultural institutions. American movies are the most used. They now occupy more than 70% of the world's market share. The United States skillfully exploits its cultural diversity to appeal to various ethnicities. And then going on here, Western media, we'll talk about that a little bit. But what they're sort of talking about right here, guys, is what we could call the culture industry, the cultural media complex. And this is the ties between, the U.S. government, the intelligence community, giant corporations, and Hollywood, right? And I mean, some of this is pretty clear. Like if you see things like Top Gun, if you see things like Saving Private Ryan, we've even heard stories about Call of Duty, like the CIA will play a direct role in that. This is where you start to get real conspiratorial and start to sound real crazy to lay folk. But this is the fact. The American intelligence community, the U.S. government, is in bed with big media. It is in bed with Hollywood. You've had CIA officers, Pentagon officials in the studio, in the writing rooms with movies as big as Marvel movies, making sure that in those movies, the U.S. military, U.S. foreign policy is depicted in a quality or a good light to the American public, right? And this is the way that one of the ways that cultural hegemony begins to take shape, because through Hollywood is filtered all mass media from the music you listen to the TV shows you watch, to the movies, to the popular artists, all has to go through here. And it acts as a filter to make sure that the only thing, and then the CIA kind of oversees it, the government oversees it as best it can. Everything has to pass through this filter of Hollywood, and that filter that is in Hollywood, that's propped up by the government, that's propped up by capitalist institutions, reinforces American values of capitalism, liberalism, the free market, U.S. imperialism, and things like that, right? It's so, once you begin to see it, it's not so subtle, but, and there's been people that have, analyzed this, like the Society of Spectacle. The Society of Spectacle talks about the ways in which advertisers use cultural values or use, the idea of a certain lifestyle to market products to us to make us believe that we need or want certain products, right? Fisher's book, Capitalist Realism, also talks about the way in which, and his stuff gets really bleak, and it's kind of depressing when you read it because it talks about, not just all the traditional ways that we think of, mass media, Hollywood movies and things like that being used to shore up our American values or manufacture our consent for the ruling ideology of our time. But it also acts in a mode of catharsis, which is something you've seen more and more recently as people have increasingly become disenfranchised with the system or are beginning to actually question the nature of capitalist systems, and if not, that we can do something better. Hollywood, mass media, entertainment, the spectacle also does something known as catharsis. And that is where revolutionary concepts, attitudes, anti-capitalist concepts, attitudes, cultural values are allowed to begin to take shape within certain parameters in mass media. To a very limited degree, the lens through which they'll show it or what they allow to be questions within the capitalist system is confined within that movie or song or TV show. But it has the ability to induce a sense of catharsis in the public, a sense of catharsis in a public that is obviously increasingly disenfranchised with the system. By watching these movies, by watching these TV shows, by listening to this music or looking at this art, it makes the consumer feel like they have engaged in changing the world. It has made them feel the catharsis that they have done something to make the world better, when in reality they haven't. They haven't done anything. They haven't done anything active, and still, there's a matter of fact, still passive consumers, right? Which is what they want. They want us to be active producers in this cultural hegemony, but passive consumers. Active producers, passive consumers, But before I get into more of this, where we talked more about the Western media, I want to play this little video for you guys here. Let's see, I'll pull it up. Hopefully you guys will be able to see it. This is from a channel, Tom Nicholas. Young guy, really bright guy though. And he just does a great job kind of analyzing philosophical questions and ideas and theories in a way that I think is more valuable as we go on with this discussion of what is cultural hegemony and how does the United States weaponize it to, kind of remain the total hegemon of the world here. So we'll go ahead and play this here for you guys.
The term hegemony stems from classical Greece, where the term hegemon was used to refer to a state, usually in this case a city-state, which held political and military dominance over others. Periods such as the Spartan hegemony and the Theban hegemony refer to times in which those particular city-states held dominance over all others, and for much of history the term was used to describe this kind of physical, geopolitical control. In contemporary scholarship, however, the term has been developed to refer to control outside of the relatively simple notion of physical control. The theorist who is mostly to thank for this development is the Italian Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci was a key figure in Italian communism towards the beginning of the 20th century. As such, when Mussolini came to power, he was put behind bars and died after 11 years in prison. While he was there, however, he wrote extensively, and some of his ideas and theories have been incredibly influential ever since. Hegemony then was a key component of what Gramsci described as his philosophy of praxis, alongside ideology and organic intellectuals. I won't go into the other two here, but essentially Gramsci used these three terms together to describe and analyse how social classes come to dominate society. Much like its use in classical Greece then, Gramsci's conceptualisation of hegemony is still about control. Particularly, he uses it to analyse how the bourgeoisie, the wealthy and the ruling classes come to dominate in a capitalist society. Gramsci's key development, however, was to acknowledge that such power and such control comes about not only through physical power, but also through cultural domination. To put it into a relatively simple contemporary example, we might observe that many media outlets and newspapers are owned by the incredibly wealthy. As such, they will tend to have an editorial outlook that will support political parties, policies and programs which legitimise the existence of vast wealth inequality. These papers and media outlets, however, do not present this as one side of a many-sided argument, but as a simple, commonsensical world view. Gradually then, the idea that some should be incredibly wealthy while others struggle embeds itself in society to the point where those whom this kind of thought process actively harms will actively support it. Neoliberal capitalism, for example, is often presented as the de facto best way of ensuring technological progress and individual freedom. And so deeply is this idea embedded in contemporary society that we'll often find that those who face the more dark side of contemporary capitalism will also be vocal advocates for it. Cultural hegemony then is something which is often not clear to see, but hides itself within and beneath cultural texts. It's essentially the idea of a dominant group using culture in order to legitimize their dominance. To use a slightly different example, there was a time very recently where a family, as presented on television or in film, would always consist of a mother, a father, and their children. Very few of these programs or films made a big deal out of this. But once we take them as a whole and we realise that there is only this image of the nuclear heterosexual family being presented on our screens, then we can see that this is presenting that this is what a family looks like, and this is only what a family looks like. Again, this is not an open political debate, but simply cultural texts supporting a certain status quo. Further examples might include many war films, where we often find that the global north and global west engaging in military intervention in continents such as Africa or South America is often shown to be quite a good thing. Again, these aren't clear bits of political propaganda, but they do help to support that status quo. Gramsci's biographer famously described hegemony as predominance obtained by consent. In this way, we can see that cultural hegemony is the idea that power can be exercised and reinforced as much through cultural texts as through physical force. Hegemony is a key concept in cultural theory, as it implicates power and politics into cultural texts. It suggests that it does not necessarily have to be intentional, but that most works will either support or revoke a certain state of hegemony. It is the fundamental idea that power is not just exercised through physical force, but is also reinforced through the stories that we tell and the images that we make, whatever form they come in. Thank you very much for watching this episode
But yeah, guys, so I just wanted to show that to you guys because it is just a really great, quick analysis of my shit's going crazy here. Of cultural hegemony, how it works and what it is, right? I wish I was as succinct as that kid. That kid's incredibly bright. So this is what you need to consider when we examine the rest of this memorandum and how that cultural hegemony also applies more directly to mass media in the form of manufacturing consent. Noam Chomsky's famous theorization on the ways in which media upholds structures of power rather than acts as an arbiter of them, right? And cultural hegemony can take a lot of forms. Obviously, he reiterated some of the things that I brought up to you guys: war movies, cultural, fixations and things like that. And he talked about it from just the point of view that it happens naturally, but then once you add in things like the intelligence community and stuff, like being involved in the industries that produce these images, it really, cements it home even more, right? So yeah, just a quick analysis of cultural hegemony for you guys. Let's see here what else we have. Let's get into the rest of this argument or this article here, memorandum here. I'll finish this reading and then we'll end this with this little video discussing Noam Chomsky's 5 filters that are used to manufacture consent, right? Says, Western media has a particularly important role in shaping global opinion in favor of U.S. meddling in the internal affairs of other countries. The U.S. government strictly censors all social media companies and demands their obedience. That's going back to the article I showed you guys a little bit earlier, how, Twitter, Facebook, all these tech companies are in bed with the U.S. government. Twitter CEO Elon Musk admitted on 27 December 2022 that all social media platforms work with the U.S. government to censor content, reported Fox Business Network. Public opinion in the United States is subject to government intervention to restrict all unfavorable remarks. Google often makes pages disappear. And I just want to take a note with that. Guys, I've noticed over the last year in particular, it is getting increasingly hard to use Google to find sources that, tell the fucking truth. I mean, sometimes for some of this stuff, I'm having to get onto page 6. Some of it's because I already know the outlets, so I know where to look. You have to do all the little tricks of Googling, like putting things in quotation marks and using dashes. It's just crazy, guys. U.S. Department of Defense manipulates social media. In December 2022, The Intercept, an independent U.S. investigative website, revealed that in July 2017, U.S. Central Command official Nathaniel Kaler instructed Twitter's public policy team to augment the presence of 52 Arabic language accounts on the list he sent, 6 of which were to be given priority. One of the 6 was dedicated to justifying U.S. drone attacks in Yemen, such as by claiming that the attacks were precise and killed only terrorists, not civilians. Following Kaler's directive, Twitter put those Arabic language accounts on a white list to amplify certain messages. So these algorithms that we always hear about, guys, these algorithms are dictated by these massive social media corporations. And these massive social media corporations take their cues explicitly from assets in the U.S. military and the U.S. intelligence community and the U.S. government generally. This isn't a conspiracy. This isn't up for debate. This is a fact. It's just a known fact. There's been research on it. There's leaked documents about it. You're literally living between the U.S. media and social media. It's like you're living in the fucking Matrix, right? It's the spectacle. It's a society of spectacle where the lie and the false narrative is pushed so much and on such a grandiose level and on every channel and on every website. And that trickles down to your community, to your church, to your workplace. So the people that you know are also regurgitating the lie to the point that it becomes common sense and you believe it. And if you don't believe it, you're viewed as crazy, right? Going on here, guys. The United States practices double standards on the freedom of the press. It brutally suppresses and silences media of other countries by various means. The United States abuses its cultural hegemony to instigate, quote-unquote, peaceful evolution in socialist countries. It sets up news, media, and cultural outfits targeting socialist countries. It pours staggering amounts of public funds into radio and TV networks to support their ideological infiltration. And these mouthpieces bombard socialist countries in dozens of languages with inflammatory propaganda day and night. The United States uses misinformation as a spear to attack other countries and has built an industrial chain around it. There are groups and individuals making up stories and peddling them worldwide to mislead public opinion with the support of nearly limitless financial resources. And just what they're talking about here kind of goes back to what we were talking about with these color revolutions. And one of the ways that they'll begin the process of implementing a color revolution that is taking existing grievances or existing groups within a country that the U.S. doesn't like or wants to see changed, and then stoking those up into a fervor, changing the way that they view their country ideologically so that hopefully that they can get them to instigate a regime change, to put a new government in that's more sympathetic to American interests, right? So that's going on with these color revolutions. And a key point of it is this propaganda aspect. And one of the ways this has taken form is things like Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Asia, right? So I'm going to pull this up here for you guys. This is from the Wilson Center. Again, a Western source, right? This isn't Chinese propaganda. The CIA and the Committee for Free Asia under Project DT Pillar. This talks about how Radio Free Asia was explicitly created in order to foster regime change in these countries, in order to provide propagandistic ideological support for regimes that the U.S. did support in those areas. Today, Radio Free Asia operates under a 1994 congressional mandate known as the International Broadcasting Act, IBA, to deliver uncensored domestic news and information to China, Tibet, North Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma, among other places in Asia. hit the rewind here, guys. In February 1951, the Central Intelligence Agency's Office of Policy Coordination, OPC, initiated a proprietary project to establish a committee similar to the National Committee for Free Europe body and organization in aims, but oriented towards Asia rather than Europe. A 1990 secret CIA report gave some insight into Radio Free Asia's establishment as a private body, quote unquote. They paint this organization and this institution as being free media. It is not free media. It is propped up, it is backed, it is financed by the U.S. intelligence community, by the U.S. Pentagon. We have a quote here from that document. It says, the Committee for a Free Asia in 1951, sanctioned by National Security Council and with the knowledge of congressional oversight committees, supported by covert indirect CIA funding, the committee had been created to help find ways to contain and expand private U.S. contact and communication with people of Asia, following the establishment of communist regimes in China and North Korea. The emphasis was on a private instrumentality that would be privately governed and have the freedom and flexibility to do the things the government would like to see done, but which it does not to do or could not directly do. Great asset here, guys. Really dives into the whole story of how these organizations came up. So Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, these are always held up by liberals, even some rad liberals, and some embarrassments of leftists as a reason why China's bad, as a reason why Russia's bad, as a reason why North Korea is bad. These are CIA cutouts. And yes, they started in 1951, but as we see here, in 1994, they were reinstituted by a congressional mandate known as the International Broadcasting Act. So all that funding and resources still comes from it. Okay, so we can see here how the U.S., through this document, the memorandum that we talked about, and these other assets, we can see how the U.S. Compels its cultural hegemony worldwide in order to manufacture consent for overseas interventions, in order to instill American values such as liberalism and free market and stuff. But the question is, I mean, we all ask ourselves this, like, why don't the American people wake up to what's going on? And increasingly do, of course. But all of us know how frustrating it is to see people continuing to repeat the same lies, to get us into the same kind of wars for the same reasons, how people continually deal with corruption domestically in the political process, corruption that is so brazen, that has a fancy title now, lobbying. Right. I mean, the complete rotting through of a political system. Why do people put up with it? This comes into the way that U.S. media corporations filter information through the lens of cultural hegemony of the United States empire, cultural hegemony of the capitalist superstructure. Right. And perhaps no other, thinker or philosopher took the ideas of Antonio Gramsci's cultural hegemony and applied it to mass media in the United States, as well as Noam Chomsky, right? So what I'm going to play for you next is a fun little video that talks about the 5 filters of control and the ways in which mass media is used to manufacture consent, not just for the ruling class or the ruling ideology within the United States, but for endless political corruption and endless overseas wars and imperialism. So without further ado, guys, I'll go ahead and play this here for you. Maybe. We got an ad, of course. Okay. I'll go ahead and play this here for you guys. It's just a great graphic little video. Sums it up for those of you who may be new to some of these political theories. It's narrated by the woman from Democracy at Work. I apologize. Can't remember her name. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and roll this for you guys, and then we'll start winding it off here because we're already going for a while.
Propaganda. Many use the word when talking about countries like North Korea, Kazakhstan, Iran. Countries viewed as authoritarian through the lens of the Western media. Press freedom, freedom of thought. People use those terms when talking about countries like the United States, France, Australia, democracies. In 1988, Noam Chomsky co-authored a book with Edward Herman called Manufacturing Consent. It blasted apart the notion that media acts as a check on political power, that media inform the public, serve the public, so that we can better engage in the political process. In fact, media manufacture our consent. They tell us what those in power need them to tell us so we can fall in line. Democracy is staged with the help of media that work as propaganda machines. Media operate through 5 filters. The first has to do with ownership. Mass media firms are big corporations. Often they're part of even bigger conglomerates. Their endgame, profit. And so it's in their interests to push for whatever guarantees that profit. Critical journalism takes second place to the needs and interests of the corporation. The second filter exposes the real role of advertising. Media costs a lot more than consumers will ever pay. So who fills the gap? Advertisers. And what are the advertisers paying for? Audiences. And so it isn't so much that the media are selling you a product, their output. They're also selling advertisers a product, you. How does the establishment manage the media? That's the third filter. Journalism cannot be a check on power because the very system encourages complicity. Governments, corporations, big institutions know how to play the media game. They know how to influence the news narrative. They feed media scoops, official accounts, interviews with the experts. They make themselves crucial to the process of journalism. So those in power and those who report on them are in bed with each other. If you want to challenge power, you'll be pushed to the margins. Your name won't be down. You won't be getting in. You've lost your access. You've lost the story. When the media, journalists, whistleblowers, sources, stray away from the consensus, they get flat. That's the fourth filter. When the story is inconvenient for the powers that be, you'll see the flak machine in action, discrediting sources, trashing stories, and diverting the conversation. To manufacture consent, you need an enemy, a target. That common enemy is the fifth filter. Communism, terrorists, immigrants, a common enemy. A boogeyman to fear helps corral public opinion. 5 filters, one big media theory. Consent is being manufactured all around you, all the time.
Yeah, guys. So that's that for you. Just a great little short video kind of explaining the process of manufacturing of consent. I'm sure many of you guys are quite familiar with that. But this also applies not just to the mass media machine, but it applies to our school systems, to our everyday communities, right? Where if you stray outside of, the established consensus within thought, it's hard to get a job in the education system, in the high schools, in the colleges, in the public universities and stuff like that, because your ideology directly conflicts with the ideologies of those in the ruling class, and so they keep you out. And this just really reveals the ways in which we are not, most of us, living in reality. We are living in a complex system of lies and sleight of hand and illusions, right? And this is most everybody. And this is why it is so hard, it seems, at times, to wake people up in this country, is because of the system. Very complex, very deliberate, well-oiled machine of manufacturing consent, of cultural hegemony. And that cultural hegemony spans not just here in the imperial core of the American empire, but all throughout the world, right? But on a brighter note, that cultural hegemony is increasingly beginning to fray at the edges as people all over the world, people here in the imperial core themselves, are beginning to wake up to the lies that surround them every day, right? But yeah, guys, that's really all I have for you. It kind of concludes our discussion on technological and cultural hegemony, how the United States upholds these things and how they abuse these pillars of hegemony to maintain its dominion over the earth, over the people of the earths, right? But yeah, guys, so that's really concludes the end of this series of 3 parts. I hope I've done the best I can to, go through this memorandum released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've tried to show you, resources from across the world, from the West, from the global South, from everywhere, that kind of back up the claims made by the Chinese Foreign Ministry about the ways in which America has cultivated and maintained a power, an empire that spans over the entire world, right? I've had a lot of fun doing this one for you guys. I'm hoping soon to maybe do some analysis about the SVB banking collapse and what that kind of means for greater implications for the American economy and the American empire as a whole. So if you guys are interested in seeing that, go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see. Comment with any other relevant information surrounding this particular discussion that we've had today, or let me know what topics you would like to see discussed. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, drop those comments, boost the algorithm, makes a huge difference, guys. And of course, don't forget you can support my independent media work on Patreon at patreon.com/entitledmillennials. You can join me there for $1 a month. Pretty much little to no money at all. But if everybody watching the show contributes that $1, we'll be sitting real pretty at being able to do this full time, guys. Thank you to all the new patrons we've gotten. Special thank you to everyone that's supported me through one-time PayPal donations as well. You guys know who you are. Kevin Ramirez, Eva Mathis, all you guys. Thank you so much. You guys helped me make my bills this month. So you can support me through PayPal donations as well if you want. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. As always, I love you very much, and it's been great hanging out with you, and I look forward to speaking again soon.